What is up, y'all? Lazaro Casanova here, and today I am pulling back the curtain on my full mastering workflow. But here's the secret. A great master starts in the mix. And before we even touch the master chain, I am doing 3 things that will help you prep for professional volume. Number 1, cleaning the mud. Rolling off low end on individual tracks to give the kick and bass room to breathe. Number 2, create headroom, using Ableton Saturator as a clipper to catch rogue peaks before they hit that master bus. And number 3, gluing the mix, grouping tracks, and applying subtle compression so everything sounds like a cohesive record, not a pile of sounds. Once the mix is tight, we'll drive straight into my mastering chain to bring it home. So let's get into it. Alright, so here is my project, and first thing I like to do to make sure everything is organized is color code all of my groups. So I have instruments in yellow, bass in pink, vocal in red, and drums in blue. And outside of this, I do like to consolidate everything to be one big fat file, so all of the cuts and anything is just out of the way. Alright, so step 1 is rolling off the low end. And step 1 is all about frequency management. One of the biggest mistakes I see is letting low end energy build up in tracks where it doesn't belong. Even if you can't hear it, that sub information is eating up your headroom and making your master limiter work harder than it needs to. I'm going through all of my non-bass tracks and aggressively rolling off the low end. We're carving out a dedicated sonic lane for the kick and the bass. When you clear that space, the bottom end of your track immediately feels tighter and more professional. Step 2 is clipping with Ableton Saturator, and step 2 is where we gain our loudness advantage. Instead of waiting for the master fader to handle all the peaks, I use Ableton Saturator as a clipper on individual tracks and buses. By engaging soft clip and driving the input slightly, I'm transparently shaving off the highest transients. This levels out the dynamic range before it even hits the master chain. It's a much more musical way to gain headroom than just smashing a limiter at the very end. This is how you get a loud master that still feels like it has knock. So here you can see I have a clipper rack saved from previously, and what I got going on here is a macro that ties both the output and the drive so they turn at the same time. And as I am driving my signal, the output will react to that using this macro. So let's check it out. So what I am doing here is I am turning this macro knob until I get distortion, and then I back off of it. I don't want to change the dynamics or the sound of any individual thing that I have this clipper on. So it's more so like you're shaving those peaks that aren't audible to your ears to begin with, and you're creating that headroom into the master so your limiter is not working as hard. Step 3 is the grouping phase, and processing tracks in groups allows you to glue them together so they sound like a single cohesive instrument. Usually I throw a glue compressor in all of my groups, but this time I'm also experimenting with the Purified 5420, which is a plugin I got during Black Friday for $4.20, pun intended. With the Purified, I am looking for a specific tape saturation. It adds a layer of harmonic density and weight that has that kind of like hardware feel to it. The goal here isn't to change the sound, but to give the groups a finished analog texture before we move to the final stage. So here's the Purified 5420, and what I like about this is that it splits both the lows and the highs. So if you're working with kicks and stuff like that, you could do the 15 IPS, anything higher range, 30 IPS. All of these knobs can operate separately, or you could have them together, linked together. And I know there's a million tape saturation plugins, but this was a really cool one, especially for being $4.20. And here's a glue compressor, and what I like to do with the glue compressor is just drive it enough where I'm just barely moving the needle, do a little bit of makeup gain here, and that always gives me a little bit of cohesiveness on my groups. Now that the mix is prepped and the headroom is locked in, we move to the master chain. This is the final 10% that brings the track to commercial standards. I first like to start off with the EQ8. I do roll off from the bottom a little bit in case there's any other random things that might be causing muddiness or unexpected rumble. And here on the top end, this is just something to make up for my hearing loss in the higher end from all the years of DJing. Most of my mixes sound a little flat on the higher end, so I usually give it a little bit of a boost to balance that out. I use the EQ8 for surgical cuts and Gullfoss as a dynamic balancer to smooth out any remaining frequency imbalances. And Gullfoss is really cool. It comes in 2 different plugins. One of them is a plugin that you put on individual tracks. The master version of the plugin goes on your master. The only difference I've seen between the two is the amount of CPU processing it uses, and also these different parameters here are going to have a different algorithm to them, where how much you adjust this is different between the individual and the master. And I believe the master is made so you could crank up these and it'll still be more of a subtle change. Next, we focus on feel. The glue compressor adds that final touch of density, and the Brainworks V3 handles the stereo imaging, pulling the sides out of the mix so it is wide and immersive. For the Brainworks Digital V3, Brainworks, by the way, an awesome company, has a lot of different cool plugins. This one does a lot of different things that you could do. One of them being mid-side compression. I literally only just use this for 2 things specifically. One is the stereo width here. I like how dramatic you could be with this to the point where it just ruins your mix entirely. But if you are subtle with this enough, you do get some awesome width. Outside of that, to counteract the whiny that I'm doing, I lock in here on the mono maker. And with the mono maker, I basically bring it up to a frequency, in this case, like 130. So anything below 130 will be converted to mono. So kick, bass, anything with a little bit of a lower end rumble. For me, I like for that to be towards the middle, and everything else kind of blooms outward like a flower in nature. After that, I have the newfangled Audio Saturate, and this is the heavy lifter. It's responsible for the bulk of my volume increase, using saturation to push the levels without killing the transients. In this, you could drive pretty hard. Obviously, it'll start distorting at some point. But again, just like the other clippers that I'm using throughout my mix, you want to push this enough and then dial back as it starts altering the dynamics and the sound of your mix too much. What's cool about this, it does have a automatic output gain. So as you drive it, you can hear any changes with distortion without it altering your sense of like, is this louder? And I usually do that, and then once I dial it in, I'll go into manual, put it at a -0.2 to give some extra headroom so I'm not slamming the limiter as hard as some of y'all been doing it, because I hear it, y'all slamming that limiter a little too hard sometimes. After that, I have the FabFilter Pro L2, and this is the final ceiling. I'm only looking for about 2 to 3 dBs of limiting, because we prepped the mix so well in the previous steps, the limiter doesn't have to struggle. And I started using this a lot more recently. I know it's a pretty common standard. A lot of people swear by the FabFilter Pro L2. I started using it just because I found that it combined pretty well with the newfangled Saturate for the results that I was looking for. I like how transparent the FabFilter Pro L2 is. You can push this, in my opinion, more than I have pushed other limiters, and I've gotten some great results from that. But in this case, again, I would like to keep this no more than 3 dB. The Saturate is doing most of the heavy lifting. This is getting you to the last 10% of the volume increase that we're looking for. And we finished with the analyzers at the end of my mastering chain. This includes the Uline loudness meter, the Paz stereo analyzer, and the Span spectrum analyzer. These aren't just for show. They verified that our loudness, width, and balance are exactly where they need to be for a club release. So Uline loudness meter, this sits always in all of my mastering chains. I swear by this, specifically because it's free and also just an awesome plugin, a great developer. And just to show what we are hitting here, we're about minus 8.2 LUFS right now. And if you're using this as a tool along with the reference track that you're trying to match LUFS with, it's a great indicator for you to see where club ready tracks are sitting as far as volume on the LUFS level. And this can be a bit deceiving. I know a lot of us chase certain numbers with this thing, and keep in mind that perceived loudness sometimes doesn't translate exactly to this number. Dynamics are still a very important thing, but this is still a good tool to have where it'll get you in the ballpark of volume that you are particularly chasing. Paz Analyzer just gives me a overview of how wide my stereo image is and where the phasing is happening. And the Span Spectrum Analyzer just gives me an idea of my overall EQ curve for the whole track. And that's it. That is the workflow. That is the big secret that some of us gatekeep, and I don't believe in doing that because a lot of what you saw in today's video, it's stuff that I have picked up from other videos. And the important part with all of this is that my approach or anyone else's approach is not going to be a single fit-for-all magical solution. A big reason I am doing this video is because I do believe that mastering chains should be constantly evolving as you pick up new tips, strategies, new plugins, and it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be done. It's always going to be a constant work in motion. If you have any questions about any of these plugins or steps, please drop a comment below. And if this video has helped you out, please give a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. Peace.